Good morning. My name is Hugh Williams, and I am the national spokesperson for the Canadian Automobile Dealers Association. So this morning we're going to be making some remarks on the Canadian automotive competitiveness framework, and we'll be led off by Mr. Royce, followed by Mr. Bernard in French, and then we'll be able to take some questions from there and do interviews later. Thank you. Mr. Royce.
Bonjour. Good morning. My name is Tim Royce. Thank you for joining us. Today, we are launching CADA's Automotive Competitiveness Framework, which outlines concrete regulatory actions we urge the next Canadian federal government to take in order to protect consumers, small business auto dealers, and the economy. The Canadian automotive sector is in turmoil as a result of the U.S. tariffs. And while we applaud the current Canadian government on its measured response to not make the situation worse, it is clear that we are fast approaching a consumer affordability crisis as the added costs of the tariffs work their way through the different supply chains of all the manufacturers and will soon be reflected in the higher prices in the marketplace. Faced with this, our automotive competitiveness framework outlines 5 concrete actions that the next federal government can take on behalf of the consumers and industry. First, end Canada's EV mandate. Canada has been very successful in increasing the number of electric vehicles on the road over the last years as consumer demand, charging infrastructure, and purchase incentives were aligned. Most recently, however, the buildup of charging infrastructure has not kept pace, especially in multifamily homes and downtown condominiums. Both federal and provincial purchase incentives have been curtailed and partially eliminated. Consumer demand, while still growing, is nowhere near where it needs to be in order to support the numbers contemplated by the federal and provincial EV mandates, despite the tremendous investments made into new products by almost all manufacturers. When recently discussing the decision to end BC's consumer carbon tax, BC Premier David Eby said that he does not want people to have to choose between affordability and climate action. And we wholeheartedly agree. However, if Canada's federal and provincial EV mandates remain in place in their current form, exactly that will happen very soon. We urge the next federal government to adjust, update, and recalibrate the original plans to take into account the changed market realities. Second, expand Canada's automotive regulatory framework. For far too long, Canada has been beholden to the U.S.-defined environmental and safety standards for vehicles, at the exclusion of all others. This means that Canadians only get those vehicles and brands that Americans consider attractive and affordable because Canada's volume alone doesn't justify the cost involved in making the vehicles compliant to North American standards. Almost all manufacturers, including American ones, currently produce attractive and affordable vehicles in the European Union, Korea, and Japan that Canadian consumers would be very interested in. And there are also quite a few brands that would like to do business in Canada. Those vehicles and brands comply with the stringent environmental and safety standards in those jurisdictions. After all, do you really believe a vehicle that has been environmentally certified and deemed safe enough to be driven on a German autobahn of over 200 kilometers an hour is not safe enough to be driven in Canada? What we are proposing is for the Canadian government to accept the vehicle compliance certificates of Japan, Korea, and the European Union, with whom, by the way, we have free trade agreements. This measure would represent an expansion of Canada's trade horizons, is supported by almost all manufacturers, including American ones, and would not be seen as a retaliation for any U.S. activity. It is something we can do additionally. Third, do not allow big banks to compete with the small businesses that they finance. Canada's Bank Act is up for regular review and the big banks are once again trying to muscle their way into being able to lease vehicles to consumers. What this would mean is that the same banks that provide floor plan financing for our dealer members and therefore have all relevant financial information from them and have a tremendous lever over them would now be competing with them for the same customer. With the amount of power the big Canadian banks already have, it would be impossible for our small business dealers to compete fairly in the marketplace, especially if their competitor is the one holding their hands behind the back with their floor planning conditions. We should also not forget that during the financial crisis of 2008, Canada's banks panicked and pulled out of the retail finance market. In some cases, banks pulled long-established financing from successful, profitable dealers that had 80-year relationships with their bank. Two things saved the retail car industry at that time. First, the strength and resilience of the manufacturer-affiliated finance and lease companies. And secondly, the Canadian Secured Credit Facility purchased up to $12 billion of term asset-backed securities backed by loans and leases on vehicles and equipment. If the banks had also controlled leasing during the crisis, it would have been even more catastrophic. We therefore urge the Canadian government not to expand the business power of big banks into leasing. Fourth, scrap the inefficient luxury tax on vehicles. Since its inception a few years ago, the vehicle luxury tax has been an unmitigated disaster and a clear example of an inefficient tax. Even the Parliamentary Budget Office correctly predicted that it would never have its intended effect, as consumers would adjust their behavior and buy around this tax. What was portrayed as having the rich pay a fair share, but in reality was mere populist virtue signaling, has ended hurting hardworking Canadians, such as lot attendants, sales consultants, service advisors, and technicians that have been let go at dealerships directly affected by the drop in sales as consumers adjusted their purchases. In addition, the administration of this tax, through a completely new system and process, instead of through existing mechanisms such as HST, GST, is very costly to the government, manufacturers, and dealers, and is so fraught with problems and inconsistencies that the CRA has been forced to issue countless clarifications. It is time for this inefficient tax to go. And finally, fifth, pay the debt owed to car dealers for the ISEF incentives. As I'm sure many of you have seen reported in the press, a few months ago, Transport Canada announced on a Friday that the federal EV incentive program might be running out of money in the coming weeks, and then allowed one U.S. company that hardly has any investments in Canada, be they in manufacturing or dealerships, to submit claims for over 8,000 vehicles totaling over $48 million over that weekend, which led to the program having to shut down on Monday. While there's still a number of unanswered questions in this matter, one thing is clear. The ones left holding the bag were our members, to the tune of $8 to $11 million that they had fronted on behalf of the Canadian government to consumers at the time they bought an EV. This is unacceptable and undermines the entire EV support system by which our members agreed to front the money on behalf of the government in order to facilitate the transaction at the point of sale, under the assumption and trusting that they would be reimbursed accordingly. Irrevocably breaking that trust by not paying the debt currently owed to dealers would undermine our members' ability to continue transacting with EV customers in the way it is currently designed. While we have received some political assurances that this will be done, nothing has happened yet. On the contrary, we have recently received a written communication from Transport Canada that, in their opinion, they did everything right and by the book, which is quite interesting in and of itself, since we have yet to see the results of the thorough internal investigation announced by the minister. In closing, this automotive competitiveness framework will go a long way in ensuring the continued competitiveness of the automotive retail business in Canada and will enable our members to continue to deliver exceptional products and services at affordable prices to Canadian consumers, despite the tumultuous situation we find ourselves in. Thank you for your attention. I would like
Our first question comes from Todd Phillips, Universe Media. Please go ahead.
Yes, hello, good morning.
Good morning, Todd. We can hear you.
Okay, great. So Todd Phillips, the editor of Canadian Auto Dealer. So the first question I have is on the environmental standards, safety regulations. What would this opening up of the standards to imports from other countries mean for vehicle choices and pricing for Canadians? And maybe if you can answer it in the short term and maybe what that longer term outlook would look like.
Sure.
Perfect. Tim?
Yeah. Thanks for that question, Todd. It is currently the fact that pretty much all manufacturers in Canada are producing vehicles in other jurisdictions that Canadians would love, in Europe, in Japan, and in Korea. For example, hatchbacks. Canadians would love hatchbacks, smaller vehicles, very affordable, and by the way, also very environmentally friendly. But calling anything a hatchback, as you might well know, is almost a kiss of death for a vehicle in the U.S. and with consumers. The consumers don't like it. So Canadian volume alone is not enough for these companies. So we've had concrete discussions with manufacturers that are looking at bringing vehicle X into Canada that they could sell anywhere between 8 to 10 or 12,000 vehicles of those in Canada would be perfect for Canadian consumers. But they're saying that volume alone of Canada is not enough to pencil, if you will, the investments that have to be made to comply with the North American standards. And it's not that the standards are more stringent. They're just different in its execution. Because again, these jurisdictions, European Union, Korea, and Japan, are already very, very stringent in their regulations and how they apply them. So if this would be implemented short term, we would foresee a lot more vehicle offering, somewhat different than the U.S. being available for Canadian consumers. Again, very attractive products for the marketplace, and actually environmentally even better than some other products.
Do you have a follow-up, Todd?
Yes, if I could. Another comment would just be, Tim, obviously you're in contact with a lot of dealers across the country. What are you hearing from them about what they're seeing in the showrooms now with the chaos over tariffs? Are they looking to buy Canadian-made vehicles? Are they looking to buy now before the full impact of the tariffs hits? What's going on, if you will, on the showroom floor right now as a result of the tariff upheaval?
Yeah, there continues to be a lot of confusion. Obviously, that has now transitioned to more of a cautionary approach. Okay, what does this really mean for the next months? What we are actually currently seeing in the marketplace is dealers being able to advise consumers very closely on, listen, this is what I know currently, this is what I don't know, this is what my brand has told me might happen, or this is where we currently are, and advise them if they're close to or around their purchase decision. And they still have inventory on ground and coming in from the manufacturers. So dealers are not necessarily worried for right now, but they are looking forward because they already see what's coming, the affordability crisis that we were talking about, and how will they be able to handle that? Will they still have vehicles available at a price point that Canadians want to buy? What's going to happen to used car valuations? All of those things are still open questions. So there's, yes, confusion, but that's turning into action at dealerships across the country. As you know, our 3,400 members are very good entrepreneurs and are able to adjust to very tumultuous environments. And by and large, most manufacturers are doing actually a pretty good job in keeping dealers informed about also what they know and what they don't know in this rapidly changing environment.
Yeah, Todd, Hugh Williams, one thing I would add to that is that we haven't seen the second shoe drop in all of this. The U.S. administration's automotive tariffs includes automotive parts, and the knock-on effect of that to the supply chain remains a concern. But I think one of the key things that we've noticed in dealing with federal officials on this is that this government has taken a smart strategic approach to retaliation. They put a number of measures in the mix to lessen the impact on the competitive structure here. But again, we remain concerned concerned going forward. The other thing I would highlight as well is that it's clear from dealers meeting with their individual line manufacturers that not every showroom in Canada and the U.S. will look identical as they have over the last 10 years. So as we manage this crisis, there'll certainly be changes on both sides of the border to reflect the tariffs that have been put in place.
We will now take another question online. I have David Kennedy with Auto News. Please go ahead.
Hi, thanks for taking questions. Just a quick one. Tim, you pointed off the bat to consumer affordability crisis, and obviously this plan from CADA is designed to help that. Could you just give me a little bit on, what, if implemented by the government, will CADA's plan hold prices steady during the tariff fight? Will it, mitigate some of the price hikes that we expect to see? Can you just expand a bit on that for me?
Obviously, we have not necessarily done a calculation overall because it's very difficult to do because different manufacturers are affected in different ways, right? And in different in different amounts, obviously, depending on where they're currently producing, where they get their products, et cetera. But what is clear is that the measures that we are proposing, especially the EV mandate, the expansion, getting rid of the EV mandate and expansion of the regulatory framework, that would have a fairly almost immediate effect in the marketplace. Because on EV mandates, let's not forget that we're getting very close in the provinces of BC and Quebec next year, where manufacturers will be constrained to restrict the numbers of internal combustion engines that they sell to those provinces because they're not able to meet, and consumer demand is not as high, plus charging infrastructure is not there, and incentives are not there to reach the prescribed volumes in certain provinces. So restricting supply into a province obviously is going to drive up prices, right? So this would be a measure that prevents something from happening in the marketplace as well as we deal with all of the turmoil from tariffs. So will all of these measures be able to dampen all of the tariff effects, to your question? Will remain to be seen and is also dependent on different and individual manufacturers, what type of decisions they take, because some manufacturers might decide to take different decisions as well long term on their production facilities and their arrangement of supply, where they might be getting a vehicle currently out of the U.S. They might change that supply chain for those vehicles to be now coming from another country, right, to avoid some of the costs. So that will have to be considered as well.
Yeah, David, Hugh Williams, I would just add to that it's important to remember, as you certainly know, that there's more people working for dealerships in the new car supply chain than any other sector. We have over 170,000 individuals working in communities across Canada to serve millions of customers, close to 2 million new transactions and certainly 5 million or more used in parts transactions. So these measures have impact on that. And I think when you look at all of the governments, the premiers have come together with Prime Minister Carney and talked about eliminating barriers to trade. If you look at the Quebec vehicle mandate and the BC vehicle mandate, these are really interprovincial trade barriers. Canada, and those two jurisdictions in particular, is known among auto manufacturers as being a very expensive jurisdiction to do business in. And one of the things we're going to have to do to be more competitive, and it's recognized across the board by all political leaders, is clean up our own house. And getting rid of these mandates could certainly be part of that. And I'll just invite...
Do you have a follow-up, David?
Did we lose you, David?
I do have another question.
Please.
Yes. So we have a question from Grace, Auto News. Please go ahead.
Good morning, Grace.
Okay. Good morning. Thank you for taking my question. When you talk about bringing in vehicles, that are popular with consumers from other parts of the world, and you cited Germany, an example of, Canada adopting safety standards for some of these vehicles. Are you thinking about, or do you have in mind vehicles that would be more affordable for Canadian consumers? And do you have any nameplates in mind?
Always tricky to name nameplates, but I'll let Tim handle that.
Yeah. Grace, I would encourage you to have those discussions with individual manufacturers, pretty much all of them from the three jurisdictions that we mentioned, European Union, Japan, and Korea. They already all have in their potential product plans for Canada quite a few ideas of what they would like to bring into Canada. But as I mentioned as well, and this is maybe different than what it was 10 or 15 years ago, there's also American manufacturers. The industry has changed, has globalized over the last 15 years, and they also find themselves in a situation where they're currently producing in those jurisdictions certain vehicles that would be perfect for Canadians. I mentioned a couple of types of vehicles, so I'm not at liberty to discuss brands or models, if you will. I'm fairly certain you will be hearing in the coming days from all of the manufacturers on their specific examples of what they would like to bring to Canada. And again, we're only talking about those three jurisdictions, Japan, Korea, and European Union, with which Canada already has free trade agreements, and with jurisdictions that have a very stringent also environmental and safety standards, right?
Yeah, because I think that quite frankly, that would be an idea that would be popular with a lot of Canadian consumers.
Yes, and you might see nameplates that you currently don't have in Canada. They might be part of a larger conglomerate that already does business in Canada, but brands that are currently not represented. You're an expert in the industry, Grace, so you know exactly what brands I'm talking about. That form part of in Europe and Japan and Korea, part of larger conglomerates where certain brands that are currently not doing business in Canada would like to come to Canada. And with this framework, they could do so. And by the way, our members would be very, very willing to take on the business and work with those brands.
Thank you.
Grace, I would just say as well that opens up opportunities for reciprocal benefits for those that are manufacturing in Canada as well. Any other question, Grace, or others?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace.
We have time for one question with no follow-up. I have David Kennedy. Please go ahead.
Thanks. Just do one more while we're here. Just wondering, Hugh, you mentioned off a few minutes ago talking about expected changes at dealerships in Canada versus what they look like in the U.S. So I'm just hoping you can give me a little bit more on that. Obviously, we know Mazda's one example. The CX-50 is going to get dropped, at least for the time being, based on U.S. production. It sounds like you
David, we lost you there temporarily, so I can answer the base question if you like. I think one of the things that's become clear as we go through this tariff war, certainly there's the unpredictability of the U.S. administration and how they're handling tariffs. I mentioned the auto parts element, where the U.S. is tariffing auto parts, but the Canadian government, in my opinion, our opinion, has been very smart in terms of not tariffing auto parts, and we hope the U.S. administration takes that lead as well, which helps protect the supply chain. And of course, our overall goal is to get rid of any automotive tariffs at all. The industry has thrived in Canada, both on the manufacturing side and on the dealer side, by having a unified, harmonized North American market. That market is better for the economies in both countries, it's better for the dealers in both countries, and most importantly, it's better for the consumers in both countries. We need to live in an auto tariff-free environment here in North America. Until that time comes, however, to the essence of your question, David, you've got manufacturers looking at their product line and making inordinately difficult calculations as to what content is coming from which side of the border and what is compliant under the current trade agreements and how that will be treated. And we know that the manufacturers are meeting proactively with their dealers to talk about the potential implications if we don't get this solved over the next little while. We know, of course, that there's a lot of product that's already landed before the tariffs have taken place. And for those consumers that we've certainly been talking to consumers and consumer groups, if they're nervous about the tariff situation, the most important thing is to go visit your dealer and to purchase a vehicle before we see the effect of this. And with the restricted demand, presumably we'll see prices increase. So that is a certainty, and it's also a certainty that the manufacturers will be calibrating to figure out which cars they can bring in tariff-free to the U.S. market and to the Canadian market, and therefore you just won't have that compatibility. And I've been privy to numerous conversations that dealers have made on this with their manufacturers, but of course We can't share that between manufacturers to manufacturers because those are enormously important competitive decisions, but we know those discussions are going on.